In late 18th century, Europe was in crisis. The French monarchy was overthrown and replaced with a republic. Fearing the spread of revolutionary ideas, the great European powers teamed up against France. As the War of the First Coalition began, many royalist and federalist rebels backed by Anglo-Spanish forces rose in important French cities. One such city was the port of Toulon, which was taken by the rebels with the support of Anglo-Spanish fleet. The French army would besiege the city and a young leader would win fame and promotion. This leader was named Napoleon Bonaparte. After the arrest of the Girondist deputies on June 2, 1793, there followed a series of insurrections within the French cities of Lyon, Avignon, Nimes, and Marseille, known as Federalist revolts. In Toulon, the Federalists evicted the local chapter of the Jacobin Club, but were soon supplanted by the more numerous Royalists. Upon the announcement of the recapture of Marseille and of the reprisals which had taken place there at the hands of the revolutionaries, the Royalist forces, directed by the Baron Xavier Lebret d'Imbert, requested support from the Anglo-Spanish fleet. On the 28th of August, the British and Spanish commanders of the fleet, Admiral Sir Samuel Hood of Royal Navy and Admiral Juan de Langara of Spanish Navy, responded with 13,000 troops of British, Spanish, Neapolitan and Sardinian origin. Baron d'Imbert delivered the port of Toulon to the British Navy. Toulon hoisted the royal flag, the fleur-de-lis, and d'Imbert declared the 8-year-old Louis XVII King of France on the 1st of October. This result produced a potentially mortal situation for the French Republic, as the city had a key naval arsenal and was the base for 26 ships of the line, about 1/3 of the total available to the French Navy. Without this port, the French could not hope to challenge the Allies, and specifically the British, for control of the seas. In addition, Toulon's loss would send a dangerous signal to others preparing to revolt against the Republic. Although France had a large army due to its levin mass, the Republic could not easily rebuild its navy, which had been the third largest in Europe, if the Allies and Royalists destroyed or captured much of it. Both the strategic importance of the naval base and the prestige of the revolution demanded that the French recapture Toulon. The troops of the army, said to be of the Camarilleros, under the command of General Jean-François Carteau, arrived at Toulon on 8 September, after those troops had recovered Avignon and Marseille and then Orleans. They joined up with the 6,000 men of the Alpine Maritime Army, commanded by General Jean-François Cornu de la Poype, who had just taken La Valette du Var and sought to take the forts of Montfaron, which dominated the city to the east. They were reinforced by 3,000 sailors under the orders of Admiral Jean-René César de Saint-Julien de Charbon, who refused to serve the British with his chief, Jean-Honoré de Trogoff de Courlacy. A further 5,000 soldiers under General La Poype were attached to the army to retake Toulon from the Army of Italy. The chief of artillery, Elzéar Auguste Cousin de Dommartin, having been wounded at Orleans, had the young captain Napoleon Bonaparte imposed upon him by the special representatives of the National Convention and Bonaparte's friends Augustin Robespierre and Antoine Christophe Salicetti. Bonaparte had been in the area escorting a convoy of powder wagons en route to Nice and had stopped in to pay his respects to his fellow Corsican Salicetti. Bonaparte had been present in the army since the Avignon insurrection, July 1793, and was imposed on Dommartin in this way despite the antipathy between the two men. Despite the mutual dislike, Bonaparte was able to muster an artillery force that was sufficient for a siege of Toulon and the fortresses that were quickly built by the British in its immediate environs. He was able to requisition equipment and cannon from the surrounding area. Guns were taken from Marseille, Avignon and the Army of Italy. The local populace, which was eager to prove its loyalty to the Republic, which it had recently rebelled against, was blackmailed into supplying the besieging force with animals and supplies. His activity resulted in the acquisition of 100 guns for the force. With the help of his friends, the deputies Salicetti and Augustin Robespierre, who held power of life and death, he was able to compel retired artillery officers from the area to re-enlist. The problem of manning the guns was not remedied by this solution alone, and under Bonaparte's intensive training, he instructed much of the infantry in the practice of employing, deploying, and firing the artillery that his efforts had recently acquired. However, in spite of this effort, Bonaparte was not as confident about this operation as was later his custom. The officers serving with him in the siege were incompetent, and he was becoming concerned about the needless delays due to these officers' mistakes. He was so concerned that he wrote a letter of appeal to the Committee of Public Safety requesting assistance. To deal with his superiors, who were wanting in skill, he proposed the appointment of a general for command of the artillery succeeding himself, so that they could command respect and deal with a crowd of fools on the staff, with whom one has constantly to argue and lay down the law, in order to overcome their prejudices and make them take steps which theory and practice alike have shown to be axiomatic to any trained officer of this cause. After some reconnaissance, Bonaparte conceived a plan which envisaged the capture of the forts of Leguillet and Balaguer on the hill of Cairo, which would then prevent passage between the small and large harbours of the port, so cutting maritime resupply necessary for those under siege. Cateau, reluctant, sent only a weak detachment under Major General Henry Francois Delaborde, which failed in its attempted conquest. On 22 September, the Allies, now alerted, built Fort Mulgrave, named in honour of the British commander, Henry Phipps, 1st Earl of Mulgrave, on the summit of the hill. It was supported by 3 smaller ones, called St. Philippi, St. Ciemi, and St. Charles. The apparently impregnable assemblage was nicknamed by the French Little Gibraltar. Bonaparte was dissatisfied by the sole battery called the Mountain, positioned on the height of St. Lawrence since 19 September. He established another on the shore of Bregallion, called the Sans-Culottes. Hood attempted to silence it, without success, but the British fleet was obliged to harden its resolve along the coast anew because of the high seabed of Marillion and La Tour Royale. On the 1st of October, after the failure of General Lepoip against the eastern fort of Farron, Bonaparte was asked to bombard the large fort of Malbasquet, whose fall would be required to enable the capture of the city. He therefore requisitioned artillery from all of the surrounding countryside, holding the power of 50 batteries of 6 cannon apiece. Promoted to Chief of Battalion on 19 October, he organised a grand battery, said to be of the Convention, on the hill of Arines and facing the fort, supported by those of the camp of the Republicans on the hill of Jumonceau, by those of the Farinière on the hill of Gauze, and those of the Poudrière at Largobran. On 11 November, Cateau was dismissed and replaced by François Amedée Doppet, formerly a doctor, whose panic upon witnessing the death of his aide-de-camp beside him would cause an attempted attack against Fort Mulgrave on the 15th to fail. He was succeeded by a career soldier, Dugommier, who immediately recognized the virtue of Bonaparte's plan and prepared for the capture of Little Gibraltar. On the 20th, as soon as he arrived, the battery Jacobin was established on the ridge of Leavescat. Then, on the left, on 28 November, the battery of the Men Without Fear, and then on 14 December, the Chassé Coquins were constructed between the two. 2 other batteries were organised to repel the eventual intervention of the Allied ships. They were called the Great Harbour and the 4 Windmills. Pressured by the bombardment, the Anglo-Neapolitans executed a sortie and took hold of the battery of the Convention. A counterattack, headed by Dugommier and Bonaparte, pushed them back and the British General Charles O'Hara was captured. He initiated surrender negotiations with Robespierre the Younger and Antoine-Louis Albert, and the Federalist and Royalist battalions were disarmed. Following O'Hara's capture, Dugommier, Lepoip, and Bonaparte, now a colonel, launched a general assault during the night of 16 December. Around midnight, the assault began on Little Gibraltar, and the fighting continued all night. Bonaparte was injured in the thigh by a British sergeant with a bayonet. However, in the morning, the position having been taken, Marmont was able to place artillery there against Leguillet and Balaguer, which the British had evacuated without confrontation. On the same day, during this time, Lepoip finally was able to take the forts of Farron and Malbasquet. The Allies then decided to evacuate by their maritime route. Commodore Sidney Smith was instructed by Hood to have the delivery fleet and the arsenal burnt. The troops of the Convention entered the city on the 19 December. The subsequent suppression of Royalists, directed by Paul Barras and Stanislas Frerin, was extremely bloody. It is estimated that between 700 and 800 prisoners were shot or slain by bayonet on Toulon's Champ de Mars. Bonaparte, treated for his injuries by Jean-François Hernandez, was not present at the massacre. Promoted to brigade general on 22 December, he was already on his way to his new post in Nice as the artillery commander for the Army of Italy. A gate, which comprises part of the old walls of the city of Toulon, evokes his departure. A commemorative plaque has been affixed there. This gate is called the Porte d'Italie. As a punishment, the convention changed the name of the city to Port La Montagne after the mountain faction.